Good day, everybody. Welcome. This is our last week of, this is the last week of lecture. Next week, you will be having discussion boards and your final exam. This week, the only assignment you have is your discussion board and prepare for your final exam. All right, discussion board again. You must answer at least 2 questions by Thursday, 11:59 p.m. Central Time, and have at least 3 quality replies to fellow students or myself or your instructor. The final exam next week will be according to what your instructor has put together. Hopefully the instructor has already placed in the course area what the exam will look like. I personally use multiple choice questions and I use short answer. So contact your instructor if you don't know what your exam looks like or whether it's open book or closed book. Normally, I also put that in my course area as well. So, and if you haven't got your proctor forms done yet, please be sure to get them completed. Okay, this is week 7. Last week was the due date for those proctor forms, yet you can still submit proctor forms. If the system will not accept your proctor form, send an email to your instructor with the proctor information so that they can manually send the final exam to your proctor. Again, if you do not take the final exam, and it must be a proctored final exam, you cannot pass the course under Park University policy. Okay, this week we're going to talk about primarily crimes against the state, crimes against government. Okay, and the oldest one that we have, and this is the only one that you'll find in the United States Constitution. Treason. Treason is the only crime identified or defined by the United States Constitution. There are other crimes that are mentioned in the Constitution, but when they are mentioned, they're simply stating that those types of crimes fall under federal jurisdiction, and the federal government would still need to pass a law on this. It's piracy. There are federal laws in place concerning piracy, and it's a issue for the federal government. So treason is the only one that's actually identified and defined as a crime in the United States Constitution. And treason is essentially giving aid and comfort to the enemy. In other words, helping the enemy against your own government. That's treason. Okay? The only way to prove treason is by the offender admitting guilt in open court, a confession, or if there's at least 2 witnesses to overt acts of treason. Okay? They've actually had to see an overt act and testify. So they got to have at least 2 witnesses. So you're levying war against the United States in treason. All right? Another one we know is sedition. Okay, sedition is somewhat similar to treason. Sedition is the attempt or trying to get others to overthrow the government. Okay? It's kind of treason within the country. You're not helping a foreign country, but you're trying to overthrow our own government from within. So this is external. Internal. Treason is external because the offender is helping a foreign agent, a foreign country, a foreign enemy. In sedition, they're attempting to overthrow the government from within. They're not using an outside nation to do so. That's the primary difference. Sedition is under federal code. Treason is under the Constitution. The federal code, however, has for sedition has gone over many different changes over this last couple of hundred years. It can be something preaching, giving speeches to overthrow the government, uh, writing writings that suggest overthrowing the government. But it's always going to be, sedition is always going to be something advocating the violent overthrow of the government. Now, if you're just against a particular political party, you're against a particular politician, and you speak out against them, that's First Amendment right. You can do that. Okay? It's when you advocate the violent overthrow of the government to get rid of it completely that we run into a violation of the Sedition Act. Many people said back in the Vietnam era that burning of draft cards was seditious. It's kind of seditious. It's against the government, but it's not, and it's not advocating the violent overthrow of the government. It's just saying I'm not going to go to war. So it has to be more than that. Where we have our First Amendment rights, it's when we advocate overthrow, it becomes sedition. Another is sabotage. Okay, sabotage. Please do not get this confused with commercial sabotage. Like, for example, an employee gets mad at his employer and does something to the computer so that the business has a problem. Although that is it's sabotaging the business, it's not a crime called sabotage. We have to look at a different statute, a state statute for damage to property or computer law violations, something along those lines. Sabotage, as defined as a crime, is the destruction, damage, obstruction, interference, contamination, and so on, that interferes with interferes with the ability of the country to make war. Okay. Now, I've had some students that have said, well, you know, a soldier goes out and doesn't want to go on patrol, so he does something to the engine of the Humvee. That's kind of sabotage, but it's going to be handled as going to be handled as damage to property by military court, because it's not interfering with the ability of the country to wage war. Just that one Humvee. So normally it's going to be something a little more drastic. Maybe somebody puts a virus in computer chips that are going to be used in the construction of A1 Abrams tanks. Okay, we all know that A1 Abrams tanks have a lot of computerization in them, and this chip would stop the tank from operating sufficiently or efficiently, effectively. So that would interfere with ability to wage war. Same with computer chips put into a fighter aircraft, or maybe it's destroying during wartime, destroying oil refineries, so that there's less fuel for the ability to wage war. So it's going to be something fairly large, and that's going to be sabotage. Then we have espionage. Okay, espionage, again, there can be espionage in corporations. There's corporate espionage all the time. But we're not taught, there's no crime that says corporate espionage. It's something else. Misuse of computers and so on. Espionage as a federal crime is spying. This is the spying part. Spying against your own country. Okay? Providing information to foreign countries, to foreign enemies. Now, espionage doesn't necessarily have to be against an enemy. It can be against, it can be giving information to anyone, even our friends, even our allies. That's still espionage. Spying is providing information concerning our government, our military capabilities, and so on to a foreign nation. Well, We're going through these awful fast, aren't we? So these are the primary ones that we're dealing with as crimes against the government or crimes against the state. Treason, giving aid, comfort to the enemy, assisting the enemy in defeating your own nation. Current examples of treason are American citizens who have joined Al-Qaeda and are fighting against our country. Okay, Al-Qaeda is a foreign power, although it's not a country. It is still a foreign power and being recognized as such. So those people are giving aid and comfort to those foreign powers and actually fighting for those foreign powers against their own country. Sedition is from within, violent overthrow of our own government. Sabotage is destroying, obstructing the ability of the country to wage war. Okay, during peacetime, it's difficult to do sabotage because we're not waging war. But if you did something like the example where computer chips have a virus or something placed in them so they don't function right in an aircraft or a tank, then our ability to wage war in the future is certainly inhibited because those computer chips are going to keep those vehicles from operating for some period of time. Espionage, simply spying. Now, sometimes a person can be charged with espionage and treason at the same time. Because realistically, if you think about it, if you're helping an enemy, that's treason. If you're doing it through espionage, we got two charges we can use. Oftentimes, we go back as far as World War II. There were several individuals that were charged with treason because they were American citizens helping the Nazi government, the German government. They performed acts of sabotage here in the United States. They were also spying on the United States for the Nazi party. So they can be charged with all three of those. Now, sedition would be a little more difficult because they're helping a foreign country, so wouldn't be sedition. Now, the other crime set of crimes that we want to talk about briefly because we have created special laws, anti-terrorism. Anti-terror laws. There are a group of laws. I mean, I can't even begin to start breaking them down completely. Patriot Act, #1, came out shortly after 9/11. And what it did was create some laws where if you're giving aid, financial aid, or any kind of aid to terrorist groups, you can be charged. If you are acting as a terrorist, you actually join a terrorist group, you can be charged with terrorism itself. The Patriot Act also helped create the Department of Homeland Security, along with the several other acts where we joined several federal agencies together under one roof. One of the things that we often forget about now, after all these years since 9/11, it's been 12 years now, is that the biggest problem for 9/11 was not so much that we did not have information about this potential attack that was coming, but that the agencies that had information weren't sharing it with one another. The FBI had some information, the CIA had some information, NSA had some information, CIA had information, so on. They didn't talk to each other. The FAA had some information concerning the ones that were training as pilots. If all that information had been put together, then the attack would have been more solidified, have been more information, more understanding about what was really happening, and we may have been able to defeat it. So the creation of the Department of Homeland Security and bringing in Border Patrol and Customs and all these other agencies together is to have all the information in one place so it can be shared, it can be understood. The Patriot Act also provided ways in which law enforcement could conduct investigations for terrorists. Simply having a mere suspicion that someone may be involved or supporting terrorism could have resulted under the Patriot Act #1 in searching a home without a search warrant, tapping telephone lines, bugging residences and businesses, and so on. Getting into email systems without a warrant, and so on. Patriot Act #2 cut back that a little bit because there was a strong argument that it was impacting or affecting our Fourth Amendment rights, and in some ways our First Amendment rights, because you have First Amendment, again, as we talked about in week 1, you have the right to associate. Now, associating with terrorists probably not a good idea, because you're going to become a terrorist or be labeled a terrorist, which is illegal. But we have First Amendment rights, and it gets really close to First Amendment issues. So they began to curve it back a little bit, and now there are essentially secret courts where a judge now will look at the information that the agency has, whether it's the Department of Homeland Security or some other federal agency, and determine if there's enough to go get to bug a house, to bug a phone, to search an email, and so on. Right now, we're seeing problems through the National Security Agency, NSA, because they collect all cell phone information. Technically, that's a violation of the Fourth Amendment, unless the U.S. Supreme Court can find an exception to a search warrant requirement, which could occur. I mean, if there's imminent danger of harm, we have an emergency or exigent circumstance exception that would allow a search without a search warrant. All that's going to be clarified, I'm sure, in the next couple of years. It's starting to come to a head. But we have these anti-terrorism laws, anti-support laws. There's federal laws and state laws about possession or production of weapons of mass destruction. There are several different categories of mass destruction. There's chemical, radiological, nuclear, biological. Been a while since I was in the military. I think I got them all. One other that I always find interesting, they pretty much, some of the newer researchers have added it, and that's explosives. Because let's face it, the biggest damages that have been caused in terrorist attacks have been the result of explosives. Not any of those previously listed weapons of mass destruction. So we've added explosives to that category. It causes huge damage. We saw it in Oklahoma. There's also two different types of terrorism: international terrorism and domestic terrorism. This can become confusing the way they're sometimes defined. So I'm going to try to make it very easy here. International terrorism involves terrorist actions that are planned or supported from sources outside of the United States. So the attack on 9/11, even though some of the actors involved had visas to be here, they were in the United States at the time, the attack occurred in the United States, it's still an act of international terrorism because all the planning, all this funding, all the support for it came from outside of the country. Domestic terrorism is when an American citizen within the United States, without support from the outside world, commits an act of terrorism, such as Timothy McVeigh did in Oklahoma City. They blew up the Murray building, the Murray Federal Building. That is domestic terrorism. Now, another thing you have to remember or understand is terrorism itself. Not everything that occurs is a terrorist act. Okay? A terrorist act is generally an act of violent act designed to create fear and to cause change in public policy. Al-Qaeda commits terrorist acts trying to change U.S. policy towards countries of Muslim countries in the Middle East and Southwest Asia. So they're trying to change policy. Timothy McVeigh was trying to change public government policy concerning federal acts, federal powers, through attacking a federal building. So terrorist acts are designed to change policy. Anytime we have a mass killing or a serial killer, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have a terrorist act per se. For example, the shooting at the schools in New Jersey was not a terrorist act. There was no design by the perpetrator, the offender, to try to change public policy. The bombings in Boston may be included as a domestic terrorist act because the two young brothers had become somewhat radicalized and were associating themselves with terrorists overseas and the belief systems of the radicals there. So if their intent was to try to change U.S. policy concerning our treatment of Muslim countries by bombing in Boston, then it would be considered a domestic terrorist act. So we have to look at what was the purpose of the violence. Is the purpose simply because the person wants to be violent? They enjoy violence? Or is it because they're trying to change something? Okay, that makes the difference between a regular street crime like serial killing or mass murders such as in the school shooting in New Jersey in 2011 or 2012. I'm losing my years here. Or the 9/11 attack that they're trying to change policy. Okay, so those are some discussions that we can get into during this week. Again, be sure to study, prepare for the final exam. If you're in the exams, you'll need to check with the instructor, but most of the exams given in CJ105 are closed book and closed note. So you'll need to do some study before you show up for the exam. Okay? If you have any questions, any problems, be sure to contact your instructor. They're available. I personally put my cell phone number and an alternate email address in the office area and in my syllabus so that you can contact me if you have problems. Okay? Wish you all good luck next week. During week 8, we will not have a video lecture or any lecture next week. We're going to have simple a summary discussion that you'll need to complete. Again, in week 8, be sure next week that you have 1 main response answering questions and 3 quality replies to fellow students or myself, and take your final exam. Okay, with that, we'll end this particular lecture. Have a good day.